work at a private impound lot in a big city. When I started this job, I was nervous about my safety. I'd never done any security work, and I have 3 kids to support, along with a diabetic wife, but I was assured that there was nothing to worry about. Apparently, just having someone present is enough to keep most people away. It's a small lot, and we don't deal with vehicles used in crimes or anything like that. Most of our business comes from wrecks or people parking where they shouldn't. And those are usually the kind of people who pick them up on that same day, disgruntled and annoyed, but not dangerous. On the extremely rare occasion that someone tried to sneak in during the night, it was usually to retrieve something left in the car. That's only happened to me once so far, and I let the guy grab his stuff just because he was civil about it. Overall, I get pretty comfortable pretty fast. It's an easy job with benefits and a lot of downtime. This last week, we got this wrecked truck. It wasn't totaled, mostly just cosmetic damage from where it had ran into a guardrail. The driver had a stroke, and luckily no one else was involved. But he wasn't so lucky. He wasn't going too fast, so by the time he hit the rail, his speed was down. Unfortunately, that's where his luck stopped. His only family members live in another state, so that means the truck was ours until they made arrangements. It was a red 2-door Dodge Ram 1500 with untinted windows, and it sat in the slot closest to my booth about 30 feet away, so I had a great view of it. Normally, I just pass the time by reading or scrolling through my phone. I don't actually have to leave my booth unless it's to deal with a trespasser. Well, the first night we had that damn truck, I was reading some random article when I saw something move from the corner of my eye. When I looked up, it was just in time to see a head duck down inside the Dodge, like someone had gotten inside, saw me looking, and dropped out of sight. My blood was instantly pumping. My heart could have beat right through my ribcage with the way that it took off. I know some people are all about that adrenaline rush, but it's just not my drug of choice. I stared through the truck's back windshield for a solid 10 minutes before finally making my move. I figured I could just wait for whoever it was to come out, but if he managed to get inside and shut the door without me noticing, then I couldn't risk taking my eyes away for a second. Next, I tried to call out from the booth. I promised the guy I wouldn't call the cops as long as he left without any trouble, but there was no response. Finally, I had no choice but to go over there. I only had a taser as I crept toward the truck, but I didn't need it. The vehicle was empty. I knew I had seen someone, but I could only watch the live security feeds. I don't have access to the system controls. There was nothing I could do except assume I was hallucinating, so I went back to my booth. After a little time passed, it became easier to believe that I'd just imagined the shape of a person in the shadows. But almost 2 hours later, the horn suddenly went off by itself. It was a good 3-second blast that nearly knocked me out of my skin. It wasn't the alarm, just the horn. And once again, there was no one around. Half an hour later, I was back to reading and still wary. I kept looking at the Dodge every few minutes, and I eventually saw the shadow person once more, but it didn't duck down like it had the first time. It seemed to be looking straight ahead, out the front windshield, with its hands on the wheel. Also, its head was shaped a little funny, like it was wearing a hat. I stared at it for almost a minute, just to be absolutely certain I was seeing what I thought I was seeing. Then I dashed out of the booth one last time. In the split second my eyes were off the figure, was all it took for it to disappear. My shift ended less than a half an hour later. Nothing more happened. That was on a Friday. The truck was picked up on a Sunday. I'm completely fine never seeing it again, but I feel like that had to be the old man's ghost, right? I never experienced anything like that firsthand until then. Later, I found the man's picture in the obituaries, and he was wearing one of those funny-shaped fedora hats, just like what I saw on the shadow. The security company I worked for had a contract with a construction company as they renovated the cafeteria of a high school. We set up a little shack on the property, then connected a bunch of cameras in strategic positions all around the building that would feed back to the shack. Then, every hour, I'd walk the premises with my flashlight. It was a pretty good gig. The high school was out in the suburbs and in a nice neighborhood. I think it was a private school. There was a lot of money sunk into the architecture of this building, and there was a family of deer that would eat bread if I threw it to them. I bought 1,000,000 loaves at the gas station and probably overfed those deer while I was there, but you gotta entertain yourself somehow. Because it was such a nice neighborhood, my boss only assigned 1 guard per shift, and usually this was great. I'd use the time to read or play my Game Boy, but the last week I was there, an incident happened that really freaked me out. I'd been out walking, making my rounds. It's a hot summer night and I'm waiting for my deer friends to arrive. I stood there with my loaf of bread in hand, tossing slices like a frisbee into the field, when one of the alarms starts ringing. I didn't have to check the security cameras to see where the disturbance had come from, because when I turned to start going towards the shack, I saw that one of the library windows had been opened all the way. The windows on this library are big, and they move like a garage door. I shine my flashlight towards the window and catch someone halfway hiding behind the curtains. Their legs up to their shins were completely visible. They were wearing black pants and were barefoot. When the light hits the long white curtains that partially concealed him, he took off running into the dark library. My adrenaline spikes and my hands start shaking. This is my first real pursuit. I trained in kickboxing and could run marathons back in those days. I wasn't afraid that I couldn't catch him. I was afraid that he'd have a weapon on him when I did. All I could do was chase after him, screaming at him to stop and that I'm permitted to use the gun that I've been issued to deal with trespassers. I was bluffing on the gun part, where permitted pepper spray, handcuffs, and a baton. I'm forced to abandon the loaf of bread and grab the extendable metal beating stick from my belt while holding my flashlight with the other. Then I run through the curtains into the library. Exit signs are the only source of light besides what I have. There's too many places to hide in a library. I listened for running feet, but the library was silent. He couldn't have run so far out of ear's range that fast. The walls and floors just beyond the library are made of large granite stone and bricks. I should have been able to hear what direction he was running with how he bolted. Thinking that he's most likely hiding behind one of the many bookshelves, I cautiously work my way up to the front of the library and flick on the lights. But the electricity is turned off due to construction. I pan my flashlight across the library, left and right, and I see him again. This time he's standing behind a shelf that reaches chest level. He ducks down and knocks a few books onto the ground. He's too fast for me to get a description of what he looked like besides an eerie, pale white face, with what I thought was a black sleep mask covering his eyes. When I get to the row of shelves, he's no longer behind them. He's crawled a few rows down. My flashlight spots his legs crawling behind them, and I rush after. But somehow, in the brief moment, my light isn't on him. When I go around the books, he's gone. My arm hair stands on end, and it's hard to control my breathing. It feels like I'm going to hyperventilate. Then the gears holding the window in place start to click faster and faster, and the whole thing comes crashing down with a boom that shakes the floor. The glass shatters into pieces on the floor. Instantly after the crash, I heard bare feet running through the commons behind me. As the footsteps echoed away, I ran the opposite direction, back through the window and straight to the shack. None of our cameras were inside the school, so I switched back and forth between the perimeter cams, looking for the guy, but nothing turned up. I spent the next hour dreading having to go out again. The alarm is still ringing in the distance, and I start to think it's not hooked up to anything because nobody's shown up to inspect it. None of my bosses are answering their phones. The best thing I can think to do is go take pictures of the broken window. When I return to the library, the bent metal window frame is once again in a locked position, wide open. Seeing this breaks my last nerve of courage, and I run back to the shack and lock myself in until I'm relieved of my position. When my coworker arrives around 2:50, I see his car headlights pull into the property. I have the door open and ready for him to come in. The company belt's sitting on the desk, waiting to be strapped on by the next protector of this construction site. When I walk outside, the alarm is no longer ringing, and I leave without telling him about the library. All day I'm expecting to get a call where I have to explain what happened to their big expensive window. But the day goes by and nobody calls. Another goes by and no phone calls. I'm supposed to return for another shift the next night. I'm obviously anxious getting there, terrified by any sound I'd hear outside the shack. I skipped my first couple of scheduled walks, but willed myself to get out there at least once. My legs were hurting from sitting and I needed to stretch anyway. I gather my things and remember to take the camera. Maybe it hasn't been seen yet. I didn't know how thorough the other security guards are on their walks, though I couldn't believe anyone would have missed it. I walk through the grass instead of the concrete walkway in hopes to mute my footsteps from I don't know who. I'm disappointed when I don't see the deer in the field, but I notice the loaf of bread I dropped is gone. Around the corner, I lift the camera up to my eye. The garage-style windows closed this time. Then I put the camera down again. The window in front of me was now fixed. My astonishment led me to walk up to the glass and knock on it. It wasn't my imagination. What I was looking at was real. A window of its size and specifics. It couldn't have been ordered and replaced in 2 days. What could this mean? I really don't know. My grandmother had dementia. Could it be possible I had an episode at 40? I wasn't contacted about it either, and a discovery like that would have definitely warranted some sort of check-in. I got on the computer and pulled up the alarms program. It keeps an automatic record of its activations. But it didn't have any inputs from that night. I got real close to the glass, peered in with my flashlight. The library was exactly how I remembered it being. The scene played out in my head like a movie. I could almost watch it playing out in front of me. All the way up until my flashlight moves over to where the man had ducked behind the shelves, and I saw that the books were lying on the floor from where they'd fallen previously. A foreboding energy filled my body, and I stepped away from the window. The rest of the night and that week, I didn't go to that side of the school. I'd make a C shape around that property, pretending that that corner didn't exist until we were done.